In a world where wealth and loneliness often walk side by side, one powerful millionaire never expected that a simple meeting would change his heart forever. When he found a little girl cleaning the windows of his office, what followed was not just kindness, it was the beginning of a bond that would melt even the coldest walls around him. This is a story of compassion, hope, and the love that reminds us humanity is greater than riches. Victor Joel was not a man easily startled. Every day his life was mapped out with precision. Meetings lined up, calls scheduled to the very minute, contracts waiting neatly in golden folders. He lived in a fortress of glass and steel, 30 floors above the ground, where surprises had no permission to enter. But that afternoon, everything shifted. The quiet hum of the city below usually soothed him. The ticking of his antique clock kept rhythm with his signature strokes on papers worth millions. Yet amid the silence, another sound crept in, faint, hesitant, but undeniable. Squeak! Squeak! Victor paused, his pen hovering midair. The sound wasn't from the machinery. It wasn't from the air conditioning. It was softer, fragile, like a child's hand dragging across glass. His sharp eyes flicked upward, scanning the tall window that framed the skyline. And there, his heart skipped an unfamiliar beat. A little girl stood pressed against the glass, clutching a rag too large for her tiny hand. Her head barely reached halfway up the pane. She stretched on her tiptoes, her thin arms trembling, as though the weight of the world sat on her shoulders. Victor blinked, wondering if fatigue was playing tricks on him. But no, this was no illusion. The child was real, so small, so delicate. Her blonde hair caught the light, but it was tangled, unbrushed. Her dress was faded, the hem uneven, as though stitched and restitched too many times. Victor's lips parted in shock. In 35 years of living, he had never seen anything like this inside his empire. No child belonged here, least of all one cleaning windows 30 floors above ground. He rose slowly, his leather chair creaking under his sudden movement. The girl stiffened, sensing his presence. Her hand froze mid-wipe, rag pressed against the glass, breath shallow. Victor's footsteps echoed on the polished marble floor as he approached. He kept his tone measured, though his chest tightened in confusion. "Who let you in here?" The little girl jerked, the rag slipping from her hand and falling to the carpet. Her wide blue eyes locked on his. They shimmered with fear, not the kind born from mischief, but the kind born from pain too heavy for such young shoulders. She didn't speak. Her lips trembled. Her small hands fisted at her sides as though clutching courage that wasn't there. Victor frowned, expecting at least an answer, a name, a reason. But the silence stretched longer. And in that silence, something stirred inside him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't irritation. It was something he hadn't felt in years, an ache. The room, once filled with the sterile order of business, now felt fragile, as though the innocence of a child had cracked open a part of his heart he didn't even know existed. Her silence was louder than any words. It pressed against him like thunder rolling in a storm. He could almost hear what she wasn't saying. Fear, hunger, desperation. Victor's chest rose heavily. This wasn't just a child. This was a story waiting to be told. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, he needed to hear it. Victor's footsteps softened as he approached the fragile figure. Every step felt heavier, as though the distance between them wasn't measured in feet, but in worlds apart. He had never bent before anyone in his corporate kingdom. But now, before this child, something inside urged him not to stand tall. He slowly lowered himself, kneeling until his sharp eyes met her timid blue gaze. His suit, perfectly pressed, brushed against the polished floor. His polished shoes gleamed like mirrors, too cold, too foreign next to her worn-out sneakers with holes at the toes. He spoke gently, his voice stripped of the power it usually carried. "What's your name?" The question floated in the air, delicate yet demanding. The little girl's lips quivered, her chest rising quickly as though the simple act of answering required courage she barely possessed. She pressed her rag tighter against her chest, as if it was a shield against the world. Finally, her voice broke free. It wasn't loud. It wasn't steady. But it pierced through the silence like glass shattering. "Romina. Romina Angel." Victor's breath caught. "Romina Angel." The name rolled through the quiet room like a whisper of something holy. So innocent, so fragile, yet it carried weight like a secret aching to be told. The sound of her name lingered in Victor's chest, melting a piece of the steel wall he had built around his heart. For years, he had faced ruthless businessmen without flinching, signed billion-dollar contracts without a second thought. But this small voice carried more power than any boardroom, more gravity than any deal. He found himself repeating softly, almost reverently, "Romina Angel," as if the name alone deserved respect. Victor tilted his head, studying her closer now. Her hair was messy, her face smudged with faint streaks of dirt, yet her eyes, those ocean blue eyes, held stories untold. Stories of nights too dark, mornings too heavy, dreams too far away. He forced himself to ask, though his chest tightened as if bracing for a blow. "Why are you cleaning my window, Romina?" The question carried no judgment, only concern. But the moment it left his lips, he noticed her little hand grip the rag tighter. Her knuckles turned white. Her shoulders shook faintly, as though the truth was a storm she couldn't hold back. Romina lowered her gaze, avoiding his piercing eyes. She shifted her weight nervously, her tiny sneakers squeaking against the marble floor. Victor waited, patient, quiet, though his pulse drummed with suspense. The silence dragged on, thick and unbearable. He leaned in slightly, his voice softer now. "You can tell me, Romina, I promise. You're safe here." Her lips parted, but no sound came at first. Her eyes glistened as though holding back tears too heavy for a 6-year-old. She swallowed hard, clutching the rag like it was her lifeline. In that fragile moment, Victor knew. Whatever words left her mouth next would shake him more than any deal, more than any empire he had built. Her truth was coming, raw, unpolished, heartbreaking. And Victor Joel, the untouchable millionaire CEO, felt utterly unprepared for it. Romina's lips trembled before sound escaped them. Her voice was faint, so soft it barely reached Victor's ears in that tall, echoing office. It was the kind of voice that carried more pain than strength, a whisper built out of survival. "My mom said, if I clean, maybe I can earn a little money." She paused, eyes flickering down at her sneakers as though ashamed of the truth. Her little chest rose unevenly, fighting to breathe out the words. "She's sick, and we need food." Victor froze. Time itself seemed to stop between those glass walls. The city outside still roared. Cars still raced through the streets. But inside his office, silence pressed down, heavy and merciless. The words were simple, innocent, but they struck with the force of a hurricane. A 6-year-old child, cleaning windows, not to play, not to pass time, but to feed her sick mother. Victor's throat tightened. He had sat across from world leaders, dealt with men who could crush empires, but never had he felt this powerless. He studied her again, but this time with eyes that saw beyond the surface. Her faded dress, with threads unraveling near the sleeves, spoke of nights without enough warmth. Her thin arms, trembling from effort, told of days when meals were skipped. Her small stomach, pressing inward instead of outward, revealed a truth sharper than any words. Hunger. Romina wasn't here because of choice. She wasn't here because she was mischievous or bold. She was here because she had no other way. At 6 years old, she was carrying the weight of adulthood on her fragile shoulders. Victor's chest ached as he swallowed hard. The rag on the floor looked heavier than any treasure because it was her only tool to fight against hunger. His polished office, so cold and perfect, suddenly felt wrong. Too clean, too untouched by the world's cruelty. His mind raced. How could this be? How could a child be left to such a fate while men like him swam in wealth? How many more Rominas were out there, unseen, unheard, cleaning windows, carrying burdens too heavy for their age? The thought clawed at him, pulling down every wall of pride he had ever built. For years, Victor believed he controlled everything, markets, contracts, futures. But here was a little girl reminding him that control was an illusion. Money couldn't erase her hunger. Power couldn't stop her tears. But compassion, something he had forgotten, just might. He looked back at her, his eyes softening in ways unfamiliar even to himself. She still clutched the rag, her small knuckles pale, as though ready to be scolded, punished, sent away. Her gaze darted nervously between the floor and his expensive suit. Victor wanted to speak, but no words came. For the first time in years, the mighty CEO was speechless. And in that silence, he felt something inside him break. Not in weakness, but in awakening. This little girl was not just cleaning a window. She was cleaning the fog from his soul, showing him the world he had ignored for too long. Victor turned away, his back toward the fragile child. His hand reached for the edge of his massive oak desk, gripping it so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The polished wood, usually a symbol of his power, now felt like the only thing holding him steady. His chest ached, not with stress from a deal, not with the pressure of a business empire, but with something far deeper, something raw. It was an ache money could never soothe, the kind of ache that came only when innocence met injustice. He shut his eyes, and for the briefest moment his mind wandered to his own childhood. He saw himself as a boy, dressed in pressed uniforms, being dropped off at private schools in sleek cars. He remembered the golden spoon, the endless toys, the promises that every wish would be granted before he even asked. And then he opened his eyes only to see Romina Angel, a little soul, no taller than his desk, standing with a rag in hand, sacrificing her childhood for survival. The contrast cut through him like a blade. His voice trembled as he forced himself to ask the question, "Where's your father?" The air in the office grew heavier. Romina's little shoulders slumped. Her gaze fell to the floor, and her lips barely moved as she whispered, "He left long ago." The words were soft, but they struck like thunder. Victor's jaw tightened. His teeth pressed together, his chest rising in a slow, controlled breath. He wanted to curse the man who had abandoned this child, but he bit back the anger. Silence swallowed the office whole. The ticking clock on the wall seemed louder than ever, each tick slicing the air. Victor lowered his head for a moment, trying to keep his composure, but his heart bled inside his chest. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than it had been in years, gentle, almost fatherly. "Romina, you shouldn't be working. You should be playing, smiling, learning." He looked at her again, hoping his words could erase the sadness in her eyes. But what she said next pierced him like an arrow straight through the heart. Her little lips curved into a frown as she whispered, "But who will help Mama if not me?" Victor's breath caught. The innocence in her voice mixed with a responsibility far too big for a child. Those words crushed him more than any market loss ever could. He turned his face away quickly, not wanting her to see the sting in his eyes. Tears, something foreign, something he thought he had buried years ago, threatened to rise. Victor Joel, the untouchable millionaire, the man feared in boardrooms, now stood on the edge of breaking, not in business but in heart. His empire could move mountains of money, yet here was a 6-year-old asking a question he couldn't answer. And in that moment, for the very first time, Victor Joel felt powerless. The silence between them lingered like a fragile thread. Victor's mind was racing, but his heart was already ahead of it. For once, it wasn't numbers, profits, or risks guiding his decision. It was something far deeper. Something he had almost forgotten he had, compassion. Slowly, he lowered himself again, bending his tall frame until his eyes were level with hers. His expensive suit wrinkled against the polished floor, but he didn't care. All that mattered was making himself small enough to step into her tiny world. He looked at her, really looked, and saw more than a child. He saw courage in her small, trembling body. He saw sacrifice written on her tired little face. He saw a heart bigger than her years, fighting a battle she should never have had to face. Victor's voice softened, the usual sharp edge gone. "From today, Romina, you won't have to clean windows anymore." The words hung in the air, almost unbelievable. Romina blinked up at him, her blue eyes wide in confusion. Her lips parted as though her heart wanted to believe, but her mind couldn't trust so easily. "But we need money," she whispered, her small hands clutching the rag tighter. Her voice carried fear, not for herself, but for her sick mother waiting at home. That fear stabbed Victor deeper than any insult ever could. Without hesitation, he reached out and gently placed his warm hand over her tiny one. The contrast was sharp, his large, steady hand covering hers, which trembled with the weight of responsibility no child should bear. His touch wasn't just comfort, it was a promise. "I'll take care of that," he said firmly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're too young to carry such a heavy burden. I promise you, your mom will get the care she needs." Romina's eyes glistened with disbelief. Her lips trembled, the corners pulling as though they wanted to trust him but feared disappointment. Victor leaned closer, his voice turning into a gentle vow. "And you? You'll go to school. You'll have toys. You'll run, laugh, and play. You'll get to be a child again." For a long heartbeat, Romina said nothing. Her tiny frame shook as though her fragile heart was wrestling between hope and fear. Then, slowly, hesitantly, a smile tugged at her lips. It wasn't wide. It wasn't certain. But it was there, a small, fragile smile, carrying more power than all the contracts Victor had ever signed. Victor's chest swelled, and for the first time in years he felt proud, not of his empire, not of his wealth, but of the man he was becoming in that moment. He knew then, with unshakable certainty, he had made the right choice. This wasn't charity. This wasn't business. This was humanity. And it was the beginning of something far greater than either of them could have imagined. Weeks later, the once lonely mansion of Victor no longer felt like a cold palace made of stone and silence. It was alive now, alive with the sound of a little girl's footsteps, laughter, and the warm chatter of a family finally safe. Romina, wearing a clean white dress that swayed in the soft breeze, skipped through the wide garden, clutching a small teddy bear Victor had picked out for her himself. Her giggles echoed like bells in the spring air, pure and free, the kind of sound that melts even the hardest of hearts. Her mother sat on a wooden bench beneath the blooming cherry tree. Her face, once pale with sickness and worry, now carried color again. Tears glistened in her eyes, not of sadness anymore, but of relief, gratitude, and joy. She whispered a silent prayer, knowing her daughter's life had changed forever because one man had chosen kindness over indifference. Victor stood a few steps away, his hands tucked into his pockets. He had attended countless business meetings, signed contracts worth millions, and bought towers that touched the sky. Yet none of those victories compared to what he felt now, standing in this garden watching a child smile. His chest tightened, not with the weight of money, but with the weight of meaning. For the first time, he understood. Wealth was never about numbers in a bank. It was about how many lives you could touch, how many hearts you could lift, and how many smiles you could create. Romina suddenly ran across the grass, her tiny shoes tapping against the stones. She threw her small arms around his leg, hugging him tightly as if he were her safe place. Her voice was soft, almost trembling. "Thank you, Mr. Victor," she whispered, her eyes shining. Victor bent down, his hand brushing her hair gently. His voice, usually firm in boardrooms, now broke with emotion. "No, Romina. Thank you for reminding me what really matters." And as the sun painted the sky in gold, the scene became more than just a memory. It became a lesson, one that society desperately needed. Because that day, a powerful millionaire and a fragile little girl showed the world a truth often forgotten. Money means nothing if it is not shared. Success is empty if it does not lift others. And the richest hearts are those that give without expecting anything in return.